Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a couple of things to get into, but before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's get right into it, man. This entire episode is going to be dedicated to the NBA survey that recently dropped. Now, everybody knows this survey has its interesting points and has its questionable points. For the Orlando Magic, it was pretty even keel across the board. And I would say actually very favorable, if not kind, to the Orlando Magic in a couple of different spaces. Let's start with most improved team. The Orlando Magic overwhelmingly were voted as the most improved team or most likely to improve team this upcoming season with 40% of the votes, with the next best team behind them both being the Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers tied at 20%. Now that's interesting to look at because, again, this Orlando Magic team was injured but not as hurt as that Philadelphia 76ers team, and the Atlanta Hawks are trotting back pretty much the exact same roster except getting back a healthy Jalon Johnson. They are bringing in Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Kristaps Porzingis as a real revamp to his roster, but they're practically the same as last year. So those two acquisitions are supposed to be the two that kind of help uplift them. Let's take it one by one, starting with Philly. Philly is most likely to be improved next season strictly off of the fact that you would believe this upcoming season couldn't be any more difficult across the board than last year was. There was a point where Paul George was shooting less than 30% from beyond the arc. It's already been established that Joel Embiid is not playing back to back, so that's probably part of what knocked him down a peg on this in this voting, um in the survey, excuse me. Jared McCain already out with a UCL injury, but he's likely to come back and hopefully be able to play a good majority of the rest of the year as opposed to missing the entirety of the season as he did last season. There's a lot of things in their favor to say they should be better than last year, just simply off the fact that last season was a season from hell from an injury perspective, an inconsistency perspective, all those things across the board. The Atlanta Hawks, again, pretty much the same team as last year, but do get another real perimeter defender and add another three-point shooter and ball handler in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Add KP. Get Jalon Johnson back healthy, who was on a fringe all-star level run last year, averaging 20 and 10. You got Trae Young in a contract year. Good reason to believe that they're going to be playing their minds out. Then you have the Orlando Magic. 41 and 41 in a season where your three best players played less than 10 games together on the floor, like together. You add Desmond Bane, three-point shooting. You add a steady ball handler on the bench, something they haven't had in a little while, in Tyus Jones as this backup point guard who can actually direct offense and be a guy who can fill in at the point guard position if Jalen Suggs misses time, which is something that we have to take into account given the fact that even the timetable currently has Jalen Suggs hopeful to play on opening night, but still questionable up until that point. And you seem to have hit very well on the draft the last two seasons with the progression of Tristan da Silva, and now this season with Jace Richardson, and slightly in ways we've seen real progression from Noah Pinda as well throughout training camp into the first preseason game. All that to say that this one felt well earned. This one felt well earned because this is a team that is going to go from 41 and 41 last season to probably a near 50 or above 50 win team. And more particularly, the most improved is going to show in the fact that I think compared to this compared to this Atlanta team and compared to this Philly team, Orlando is most likely to make a deeper postseason run as well. So you'll go from a fringe postseason team that limped into the playoffs last year to a legitimate title contender out of the Eastern Conference this upcoming season, with the chance to have three All-Stars. That all makes a ton of sense. Now, speaking of potential All-Stars, Desmond Bane was voted the most underrated signing with 17% above only Cam Johnson, at 13%, Kristaps Porzingis at 10%. Those were the two that he was just slightly above. Let's break down why those guys will be considered underrated signings. Kristaps Porzingis. The last 2 years have not been kind to Kristaps Porzingis necessarily. Last year was a wonky year for him. The season prior, he wins the NBA championship, but as a part of a Boston Celtics team that practically didn't need him for the entirety of the postseason run, given a game or two here and there where he actually was participating. But other than that, he kind of got himself a Jeff Teague, Matt Barnes ring to a certain extent because he wasn't there active. He was constantly injured, dealing with the flu or some version of sickness last season. Didn't really have his full integration with the Boston Celtics roster the way he probably would have hoped, but got his ring nonetheless. So now he comes to an Atlanta Hawks team that many are kind of on the fence about what his production is going to look like, but he has a chance to bring a two-man game element to the Atlanta Hawks that Trae Young has never had, or at least has scarcely had. Cam Johnson, not your big name, didn't go to a big name team like the Lakers or like the Clippers or the Boston Celtics, or I felt like the Clippers were kind of ill-midging there. But he didn't go to one of your premier teams, right? He didn't go to the Golden State Warriors. He went to the Denver Nuggets. And although I would say they're a premier team in terms of their productivity on the floor, from a national headlines perspective, Cam Johnson is a role player, knockdown three-point shooter at the wing spot that fills a particular role, but nothing that's like life-changing in the eyes of most casual fans. Now, if you're a Lakers fan or a Golden State fan or someone of that ilk, you're going to gas that a little bit, not only because of the market that you're in, but probably because you also desperately need a wing that can hit the three ball at a high clip, because right now, neither one of those teams really have that guy on the wing that can be a consistent three-point shooter, unless you're saying that Jimmy Butler's mid-range jumper counts, or the fact that LeBron James just came off a career year from beyond the arc, I guess, counts in its own semblance, but that's kind of it in terms of consistent three-point shooting on the perimeter outside of, obviously, Steph Curry and then Luka Doncic. So star power-wise, sure. But as in terms of filled-out guys, Cam Johnson's as good as they get, and he's on the Denver Nuggets, a team that doesn't get a lot of national spotlight until the postseason comes around, outside of Nikola Jokic. Desmond Bane, he becomes underrated because, first off, the luster around his acquisition in the first place started to wane off a bit after the first couple of weeks because he was the first domino to fall. Within a week, he went from being the very first player to be traded in the offseason to then the very next trade up was Kevin Durant. I mean, quite the act, right? To follow up behind the Desmond Bane trade. And although there wasn't a ton of movement throughout the summer, Desmond Bane's acquisition became one that was more so scrutinized for the picks that were given out and questioned due to the fact that, honestly, it had enough time to be dissected given how early it was done in the summer. So practically the entire offseason, this Desmond Bane trade was dissected piece by piece. People loved it or hated it in the beginning. Then the pendulum turned. If you hated it before, you loved it now. If you hated it in the beginning, if you loved it in the beginning, you're starting to hate it now. But it's because it's had so much time to fester and sit. And now it's one of those things that simply is only going to reflect based off of what Desmond Bane actually does on the floor. But I do believe it's a fair point to make him underrated, because I think he's one that many people are still not going to be able to wrap their head around until they see the productivity on the floor itself. I should throw out that also Desmond Bane was voted as second place for biggest acquisition impact next season behind only Kevin Durant. Now, come on. Desmond Bane had 17%. Kevin Durant had 73%. So it wasn't even close, right? Obviously, Kevin Durant's impact for the Houston Rockets as a number one option compared to Desmond Bane as a number three option going to be significantly lopsided. But the fact that Kevin Durant got 73% and Desmond Bane got 17%, that's an overwhelming margin in terms of impact from Desmond Bane to anybody else. Remember, Kevin's going to be a number one option offensively for Houston. Desmond's going to be a number three option, yet still was voted second most likely to be the most impactful this upcoming season. And that leaves, mind you, if that's 73% plus 17, That leaves 10% for any other potential acquisition that was made this summer to be equally, if not more, impactful than these two guys this upcoming season. That's a lot of faith in Desmond Bane's impact on this Orlando Magic offense, and particularly the influence it'll have on the Orlando Magic in the Eastern Conference, in comparison to a Kevin Durant, who, again, in the Western Conference, is going to be a guy who's going to have to be a lead option for a Houston Rockets team that traded for him with the thought that we needed a wing, get a bucket when we need one, scorer. We got one. You put him next to Amen Thompson. You put him next to Alperen Sengun. You put him next to Jabari Smith Jr., right? And you have the ability to now be one of these dangerous teams that's not just top 5 in defense, but also now can be a quote-unquote top 15, top 10 offense as well. And, the hope is the same for the Orlando Magic with Desmond Bane, adding him to Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Wendell Carter Jr. in that starting lineup of coming in and adding this floor spacing and on-ball traceability, right? This guy who can, you can lean on him a little bit. You can follow him on the floor and say, I see where he influences the defense in a way that opens up things for the rest of the offense for the Orlando Magic. So not surprised by any means, but just keep that in mind. 17% might feel very minimal for second place of most impactful, but you have to both compare the fact that he's going to be playing a much more significant role than Kevin Durant, as far as or a significantly different role, than Kevin Durant, given the fact that Durant is going to be higher up in the hierarchy of his team compared to Desmond Bane. But also 17% towards one player, again, is still highly favorable when that means that only 10% left of the votes were divvied up between any other potential acquisition this past summer. So a lot of faith in Desmond Bane to make some real impact for the Orlando Magic this upcoming summer, and I think it's fairly warranted. Speaking of impact, they were also voted as the third best team in the Eastern Conference in this NBA survey, behind the typical teams we've talked about all summer, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks. Understandably so. Obviously, this is one of those things where, on paper, this team is on everybody's radar. When you look at the fact that they have Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane should contribute to their offensive development in a real way, paired with the fact that there's still question marks around teams like the Boston Celtics, Indiana Pacers, Miami Heat, as well as the Philadelphia 76ers, right? There's a real question mark there. The Atlanta Hawks have their own questions, just starting with whether or not Trae Young will be on this team the entire season, given the fact that he hasn't been given his contract extension yet. Not only are the Orlando Magic kind of like the surest bet right now as the definitive third team in the Eastern Conference behind the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks, but even on paper from a talent perspective, they just deserve to be in that conversation. So the fact that they're this high and have been slotted this high throughout the entirety of the summer is not a surprise to me. You bring in Bane, you bring in Tyus, your entire team is practically the exact same as it was 2 seasons ago when it pushed the Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games in the first round of the NBA playoffs. So you're that team with one more year of postseason experience and 2 veteran guards who add floor spacing, subtle ball handling, good decision making, and their own playoff experience together, might I add, to this roster. Deserving of being at least in the consideration for the top 3. Now, where in that top 3 you believe they are, I'll leave that up to you. But I think at least being considered in the top 3 is very strong when you also compare the fact that some of these other Eastern Conference teams are kind of, chomping at the bit to make their moment with the teams like the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers kind of in flux right now. But it's the Orlando Magic who are the team that everybody's starting to kind of gravitate towards as that squad that if the Cleveland Cavaliers don't do what they're supposed to do, if the New York Knicks don't do what they're supposed to do, it's likely because the Orlando Magic had something to do about upsetting the apple cart in the playoffs. We'll see what that looks like. The Orlando Magic are going to have to go through one of these two teams to get to the NBA Finals. If they don't, if there's a pathway where they don't have to play Cleveland or New York to get to the NBA Finals, the Orlando Magic are likely in the NBA Finals, to keep it a buck. But they're likely going to have to play one of these two teams in the Eastern Conference playoffs in order to get to the NBA Finals. And they've already proven that they have the ability to hang with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they have the physical toughness to be able to go back and forth with this New York Knicks team. We'll see when the time gets there, but I've discussed this so much throughout the summer, so I don't want to kind of beat a dead horse, but I'm not surprised by any means that voters are still kind of in the belief that Orlando is kind of like firmly slotted at that third spot, because until we see it on the floor, this team on paper looks like at least the third best team as a comparison to the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers, who their rosters are practically the exact same outside of the fact that instead of Ty Jerome, they have Lonzo Ball now, and they have they have DeAndre Hunter for an entire season. There's that. And then for the New York Knicks, you add in Malcolm Brogdon, you bring in Jordan Clarkson, and you bring in Gershon Yabusele, all really solid signings for, practically the cheap this summer to add real depth to a New York Knicks team that kind of still is a bit top heavy given their salaries and kind of the way they, ran their team last year from a minutes perspective. We'll see what Mike Brown does about that. But Orlando deserves to be kind of calmly flat in that top 3 spot. If they want to put them at 3, cool. Because at the end of the day, Orlando's still relatively unproven to a certain extent. But the fact that they're in the top 3, I think, is huge because you're considering the fact that this team is considered a top 3 team in the East, and we still don't even know if they're going to be a top 15 offense this upcoming year. Something they haven't been in over a decade. They haven't been even a top 20 offense in over a decade yet, and they're going to be considered the top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. That means that the floor is raising for this team, where I think the voters believe they will be at least a middle-of-the-pack offense and continue to keep their defensive infrastructure as it's been, which is a top 5 defense in the league the last 2 seasons. Last but not least, we got to talk about my boy Franz Wagner, who was voted in the top 5 for most likely to have a breakout season. Now, obviously, we've already had conversations about the idea of Franz making his first all-star team, given the fact that there's going to be the whole team world element and all those other things that will kind of help to the ability for a guy like him who has already kind of progressed every single season, and particularly coming off of Eurobasket, tends to be a much improved player every single time. This is a big year for Franz. And Franz in this particular vote was 5th, but technically 3rd. Let me explain. Number 1 for most likely to have a breakout season was Amen Thompson. That has a lot to do with the fact that he's going to be playing next to Kevin Durant, and he's probably going to be the lead point guard or be getting lead point guard minutes, given the fact that Fred VanVleet just went down for the entirety of the season with its ACL tear. Second is Asor with the Detroit Pistons, probably baking in some of the internal development similar to Amen Thompson. I think that Asar, with a full healthy season, something that still kind of plagued him these last 2 years, is going to be given more ability on ball. I think they're going to open up the floor for him a little bit more to handle the ball a little bit more. He's already a real big threat in the transition game, and he's a guy that I think next to Cade Cunningham, their 2-man game, putting pressure on the rim, going to be one of the more dangerous 2-man punches from the perimeter as far as driving to the basket and creating real opportunities around the rim, right? So, shout out to Asar. And then, Victor Wembanyama. Kind of a weird one because Victor Wembanyama having a breakout season probably has more to do with him playing significantly more this upcoming year, but that's kind of more of him being considered having a breakout season compared to last year, which is a little bit unfair because he, again, missed most of the year due to the blood clot situation. In reality, he broke out last season. The dude was a runaway DPOY candidate last year, and if he had played even just the 65-game minimum, he probably would have won it over Evan Mobley, even despite the fact that Evan Mobley and his team made the postseason. Like, realistically, he was just that dominant on defense as an individual defender. He was on his way to being a DPOY. Now, if most improved from last season just means he just wins the whole dang thing, okay, sure, I guess. But realistically, Wemby's already kind of broke out. Like, his rookie season, he played 71 games. People were already considering him a potential all-star that year. He was considered as a potential all-star last season, and it just came down to games played. Rookie year, they didn't give it to him because most of the time rookies don't make the all-star game. This season, sure. If he plays a 65-game minimum, he'll likely be an All-NBA player. If he plays enough games in the beginning half of the season, he's probably going to make the all-star team. If he plays a 65-game minimum, he likely will be the guy that everybody leans towards as the defensive player of the year this year. So, sure, from an accolades perspective, from last season to this season, he likely will take a big jump because he will have more trophies in the trophy case, so to speak. But other than that, I think we've all seen Wemby already kind of break out. And then, last but not least, before Franz, is Brandon Miller. And by the way, Amen Thompson and Ausar Thompson were tied for like number one. And then Victor Wembanyama and Brandon Miller were tied for number two. And then Franz Wagner was kind of like third in that pocket. So that's what I meant by that. But what's the likelihood for Brandon Miller, right? Coming off of an injury-riddled season last year, you believe with the acquisition of Con Kneppel that they're now going to play this 3 jumbo wing, jumbo guard, ball handling lineup with Miles Bridges as your 4 and Mason Plumlee or Ryan Kalkbrenner as their starting 5-man. And you're just going to have 3 guys who can all put the ball on the floor, shoot the 3 ball at a pretty decent clip or at least at pretty high volume, all put the ball on the floor and make things happen in the mid-range area. And particularly with Brandon Miller, it's more of predicting a breakout season for him in comparison to last season, which almost, I would say, was a bit of a sophomore slump for him. So it's more like a recovery season. And Brandon Miller's breakout year, so to speak, would be to the likening of somebody like, I think a good name would be like Tyler Hero. Like Tyler Hero had a insane rookie season. Really, really strong rookie season. Comes back the next year and kind of falls off. Third year comes in and kind of regains his space. Kind of fits more as like a 6-man type for the Miami Heat. But nonetheless, kind of played himself into being so good as an offensive generator that it's like almost kind of hard to just keep bringing him off the bench, despite the fact that he seemed to be a lot better coming off the bench against second units in certain situations, right? So that's what the likening is for Brandon Miller. It's like the rookie year was solid. The sophomore year was a bit rocky. The third year is like, okay, we got ourselves set. We know where we are. We understand where we want to be. And in this Charlotte Hornets offense, I'm going to get a little bit more attention as a guy who deserves to have a little bit more on-ball reps. And then we get to Franz. There's a million reasons why Franz should be a breakout candidate this year, but I'll give you 3. Number 1 is this Orlando Magic team is just going to be better than it's been in the past. And typically, individual success is also still catered towards what is your team doing on the floor. And outside of probably Amen Thompson with the Houston Rockets, the Orlando Magic are going to be the best team of any of the teams mentioned in conjunction to this list, compared to the Detroit Pistons, compared to the San Antonio Spurs, and compared to the Charlotte Hornets. The Orlando Magic at best are going to have the second best record of any of the 5 teams, including the Houston behind only the Houston Rockets. Also, from a likely to make the All-Star team perspective, Franz is probably the second most likely of anybody named within this group to make the All-Star team this year. The first is probably Victor Wembanyama. And then the toss-up is probably between Franz Wagner and Amen Thompson. And guess what? Franz, again, because of the international aspect and the fact that he plays in the Eastern Conference, is also probably more likely to make the All-Star team than Amen Thompson is. So there's that element. And then number 3 is if this dude even shoots remotely close to 35% from beyond the arc, he's going to average damn near 30 points. He's going to average like 27, 28 points a night if he can start knocking down the 3 ball. Now, that's a huge if. Don't get me wrong, that's a huge if. But nonetheless, there's a real chance that he could be in position to be a near 30-point per game scorer this upcoming season, despite the fact that he plays next to Paolo, despite the fact that he plays next to Desmond Bane. Because on ball, he's going to have the reps, he's going to have the use, he's going to have a plus 26, 27% usage on this team. He's going to have a 27, 28, 32, somewhere in that ballpark usage percentage on this team next to Paolo Banchero. Paolo probably going to be floating somewhere around 30, 32% himself. Now, that gets a little tricky because once you start breaking that down, it gets a little dicey, but I do genuinely believe that Franz Wagner and Paolo are both going to be north of 25% usage on ball. Total usage of also counting in a potential assist created, actual assist created, those things. I think they're both going to be floating around 30%. Genuinely. So he's going to have the usage total to do it. He has the most likelihood to be an all-star outside of Victor Wembanyama in this group. And he's going to play on arguably the best, if not the second best, team of the discussions. So a breakout year for Franz Wagner is not only likely, it's practically inevitable at this point, barring injury, knock on wood. So the Orlando Magic were very favored, I think you could say, in this NBA survey. Shout out to the NBA survey. Always tends to have its real interesting points. I think for the Orlando Magic, they were both fair, but I also think they were very realistic about where the Orlando Magic are right now when you factor in both their youth, the season they're coming off from an injury perspective, the on the margin acquisitions that they made, and also factoring in individual development internally from guys like Paolo, guys like Tristan da Silva, Franz, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Wendell Carter, right? You're looking at the individual growth within the roster as well and saying like this team has the trajectory to, of course, be better than a 41-41 team when healthy, but also now with the acquisitions they've made with Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones more particularly, this team has the upside to be like a 48-50 win team that not only looks good in the regular season, but now has much more postseason equity because they have two guys that have played in big postseason moments in the Western Conference, because they now have two star forwards in Franz and Paolo that have played in the postseason in back-to-back years, right? So it's all projecting, of course, but I think that the NBA survey was very fair to what the image of the Orlando Magic is going into the 2025-26 season. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below, how do you guys feel about the votes for the NBA survey? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Were there other categories that you thought were really interesting on the NBA survey that either did or did not mention the Orlando Magic? Interested to hear what you guys have to say. The NBA survey is not as questionable as the ESPN Top 100 list was, but it's always a good exercise in discussion because it gives you a good framework of how people view these teams going into the regular season. But with that all being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Again, hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. The NBA regular season is less than 2 weeks away. Time to lock in. Orlando Magic fans, I'm with you guys. Until next episode, though, peace.